Each of the 6 teaching sessions recognize that there are complexities in the 21st century that provide new opportunities for evangelism. Each session will have a brief introduction to summarize the opportunity and the complexity, to be followed by practical activities to train people in evangelism. This session looks at the complexity of secularism and the resultant opportunity that narrative provides. The Western world has sharply divided itself with concerns about sacred or secular. In everyday life, then, secular conversations are often much more common for the average person than discussions about ultimate issues of heaven and hell and salvation. As a result, many do not perceive the church as relevant to their everyday needs and concerns. This rise of the de-church population testifies to this. Amidst the onslaught of secularism that has pushed out religion from common discourse, the irony is that postmoderns now have a hunger for spirituality to address their deeper needs and concerns. In short, secularism does not address the deeper longings and pains and desires that linger long after scientific theories have reached their limits. For the most meaningful aspects of life that include deep values and emotions, secular solutions are simply not relevant. For example, what scientific formula can be used to prove that you love someone or that your life has purpose to it? This now provides an opportunity to address these issues through what are called alternate plausibility structures, such as narrative. While laws based upon scientific plausibility structures are insufficient, narratives are deep and robust enough to carry the weight of deeper values and meaning. Secularism now provides an opportunity for evangelists to consider the role of narrative for conveying the gospel, such that evangelists are now regarded as good storytellers who portray true stories that address the deeper longings of the soul. Narrative is an approach that effectively conveys the gospel. For this week's activity, please break the students into pairs so they can learn and apply the Young Life's 3-story approach, and then we'll teach them James Chung's big story presentation approach. The 3-story approach basically works with this. People listen to someone else's story such that they can then share their story and then interject God's story in their midst. Bill Muir explained, the 3-story evangelism is about bringing 3 stories together in a natural way. It's not talking people through a sequence of predetermined steps or just simple parts of a story. The approach is about listening to the story of those we expect to listen to us. As we hear their story, then we tell our story and link them simultaneously to God's story. So here's how we go about the first storytelling session. After you pair people to enact the 3-story approach, we'll ask them to do a role play. And these scenarios that we want them to role play are provided on the website. The first part of the role play becomes talking about their story. One person becomes the evangelist, the other the seeker, and the evangelist is encouraged to listen to the story of the seeker in order to find authentic points of contact with them. Rebecca Pippert likens this to a boat rowing around an island looking for a safe place to land. There should be authentic places of empathy or familiarity between the listener and the seeker. Listening to the other person's narrative is the starting point of the 3-story approach. The second aspect is, after listening to the seeker's story, the second part of the 3-story approach focuses on the listener's own story. Students are encouraged to present their personal testimonies and stories in a way that relate to the other person's story. Encourage the students to make their testimonies brief and relevant for seekers. To assist them in forming concise and memorable stories, we've encouraged them to try the Young Life tool that consists of 3 balls. These are all balls connected on a leather string. The first ball is a cork, which represents their natural life before coming to Christ, or their natural struggles or concerns that ideally connect to the natural issues that arise from listening to the other person's story. The second ball is red. It's the largest and heaviest ball, to indicate that Jesus' work in their life should be the focus of the story. And then the third ball is shiny, to indicate that now you reflect the story back onto the listener with a question, such as, does any part of my story connect with your experience? Or do you feel that moving closer to God could help you? Or perhaps a question like, would you like to draw closer to God? Now, students are asked to practice their story in pairs so that they learn how to balance their discussion in these three areas. Oftentimes in practice, we found students spend most of the time on the cork ball. In other words, their life before Christ or their issues or concerns, with a very short discussion on the red ball and even less on the shiny ball. Now, if the seeker is open to further spiritual discussion, then we suggest they use James Chung's approach to present the gospel story, what he calls the big story. Chung starts the story from a position of brokenness, where the world has pain and chaos. In other words, the world's been damaged by evil. This is something that people often resonate with in the 21st century. He then takes the story to how people were created and designed for good. To then, third, describe how Christ restores us for better. And last, how together people can make a difference as they are sent together to heal. So to describe this big story approach that's adapted by James Chung, we suggest that you show them the video using the URL that is on the course Moodle site. You show the URL so that they can then illustrate this presentation of the big story on their own. Students will take turns to sketch this approach as best they can and describe it to the person that they're paired up with. After the role play in pairs, bring the entire group back together again and ask them to share the strengths and weaknesses of these different approaches, either to help each other on how it could have been done better or to start to correct ways that they may have done wrong. Point out that these evangelists should focus upon how to better engage people and to foster authenticity, not just to develop like polished presentations or fulfill some subjective ideas of success. Consider the following questions to conclude in the debriefing. When would these approaches be appropriate? What modifications may you make that will fit you better for the particular people that you interact with? What questions, perhaps, would you have used to make the person feel a bit more comfortable? And what did you find in this approach, and what would you suggest? Perhaps you could ask, how can your story reveal God's engagement in your life in a way that is relevant to the inquirer? Or maybe, how can God's story address the yearnings and the concerns and longings of the inquirer? So to conclude our session for today, narrative is an effective approach because it is an open conversation that gives the inquirer the opportunity to share their story over time through a natural friendship that builds through this process. Frankly, isn't this how friendships are grown? Through mutual listening and sharing of our stories. The role play condenses in a very short time what often requires a longer series of conversations. But narratives are powerful, since they do not confront, rather they persuade and encourage as two people share experiences. Don't forget, your story of God's work in your life is the best visible evidence of Christ's power that people need to see. When your story and your life and your deeds all point to the reality of Jesus, this is a powerful testimony of Jesus that people cannot easily dismiss.